I've likened it to, and I will probably get slated for saying this, likened it to being in some kind of abusive relationship. I was working on the naive assumption that the people who run the hospital would all be pulling in the same direction in terms of patient care and patient safety. And of course, what I'm hearing is that it just didn't seem quite right. But I have no reason not to trust these people. How she would have good grounds to report us to the GMC for some of our behaviours, how he'd had to have extensive discussions with her and her family to apologise for her behaviour. And it was strange because he was almost suggesting that he was somehow our protector, because if it hadn't been for him, we'd have been reported to the GMC.
He was then asked about a meeting Dr. Breary had with senior managers and nurses the following month. This was the meeting when Arian Powell, the neonatal ward manager, told Dr. Breary he was wrong about Lucy Letby, and the consultants felt again they'd got no choice but to accept the decision of the senior managers, to wait and see what happened.
Steve Breary told me that there was such a degree of pushback that he didn't feel that he could do anything else other than accept this final decision. We were just frustrated and lost.
Later, when baby N was attacked, Dr. Jayaram was on holiday. He also wasn't on duty when baby O, the first of the triplets, died, but he learned about it the following day.
This was June the 24th, and this was the day he met with the boss of the hospital's urgent care division, Karen Townsend, in the hospital coffee shop when he told her about the consultant's concerns for the first time. It's also the day baby O's brother, baby P, was murdered. He said he was simply asking her, please help escalate this so Lucy Letby doesn't carry on working on the unit unsupervised. But he admitted that with hindsight, he could have been more assertive.
I could have been more forthright. I could have said specifically, you must remove her from the unit, and I didn't say that.
After the death of the triplets, lots of meetings took place between consultants and senior managers, both in person and over email. In one email, Dr. Jayaram said the concerns were not being treated urgently enough, and Ian Harvey replied to tell the doctors to cease forthwith any talk about it. But then Dr. Jayaram said Ian Harvey came to see him in his office and reassured him the police would be called. But we know the police were not called, and in fact it was another year before they were, and Mr. Harvey has told the inquiry in a statement that he had no recollection of this conversation. Dr. Jayaram said the consultant's relationship with the senior managers by now was like an abusive relationship.
This is a very crass analogy, and I apologise, but I've likened it to, and I will probably get slated for saying this, likened it to being in some kind of abusive relationship. I was working on the naive assumption that the people who run the hospital would all be pulling in the same direction in terms of patient care and patient safety. And of course, what I'm hearing is that it just didn't seem quite right, but I have no reason not to trust these people, because they should be pulling the same direction.
By this point, he said Lucy Letby had been removed from the unit, so he felt there was a lack of urgency from senior managers. He also said the consultants were told by Stephen Cross, the hospital's legal advisor and a former detective, that calling the police would be inappropriate and wrong. He was also asked about that extraordinary meeting in January 2017, when the consultants were first told that the Royal College and Dr. Horden's reviews had found nothing and no wrongdoing by Lucy Letby. Now this, you'll remember, is the meeting that Chief Executive Tony Chambers banged his fist on the table and told the doctors he'd be drawing a line under everything and Lucy Letby would be reinstated to the unit. The consultants were also told they had to apologise to her, which we know they eventually did. Dr. Jayaram said Tony Chambers then told the consultants that Lucy Letby's grievance had found evidence they'd treated her very badly and that she'd had grounds to report them to the General Medical Council.
I recollect this clearly. I think other colleagues will. He said, I'm drawing a line under it. You will draw a line under it. And if you cross that line, there will be consequences. And then he said, I think we need to hear from her. And I thought at this point, Lucy Letby was going to come into the room, but Karen Rees then read out a statement from Lucy Letby to us, which was a very assertive and, perhaps even, cocking a nose at us.
He said the letter was read out in a triumphant tone, and Karen Rees and Alison Kelly had a look on their faces like, "We've got you now." He said it was so strange, he wondered if it had been choreographed. They also had to write Lucy Letby that letter of apology, and he said he only agreed to write it because he had Mr. Chambers' threat ringing in my ears. We also know that he attended a mediation session with Lucy Letby a couple of months later as the senior managers were prepping her to return to the ward.
Yeah, he said this was another strange meeting, but it was interesting because of what he learned from Lucy Letby herself. She told him that he and Dr. Breary had supposedly orchestrated a campaign to have her removed from the unit and given hospital managers an ultimatum that they'd call police if she wasn't suspended, which they all denied.
She was telling me that she was coming back next week, whether I liked it or not. Would I be happy working with her?
We know that while Dr. Jayaram went to the mediation session, Dr. Breary refused, and because the consultants just wouldn't back down, the senior managers eventually agreed in April 2017 that they would go with them to meet the local child death overview panel. Now, this panel had a police officer on it, and that proved to be decisive because just days later, the police launched Operation Hummingbird, their investigation into the baby deaths.
My overwhelming, emotion at this point was relief. Almost bizarrely, a sense of joy because someone had actually taken the trouble to listen to the things we were saying.
Dr. Jayaram was also asked a bit about what happened after the police were called in, and he told the inquiry about an emotional meeting with the chair of the hospital board, Sir Duncan Nicol, around a year later. In that meeting, he told him that Tony Chambers wasn't a fit and proper person to run a hospital. And we know that a couple of months later, Lucy Letby was arrested for the first time, and within weeks, Mr. Chambers took early retirement and left the trust altogether. Dr. Jayaram said he never considered himself to be a whistleblower, but he said it was vital that NHS staff feel empowered to think the unthinkable. He said the recommendations that followed Beverly Allitt's convictions ought to be in safeguarding training and clear processes in place on what should happen, and staff should also not be worried of any detriment to them, even if they raise what might be considered outlandish concerns.
Finally, at the end of his evidence, before he left the witness box, Dr. Jayaram reiterated his apology to the families of the babies harmed and killed by Lucy Letby. He also addressed the continuing debate and what he called noise around her convictions from those suggesting she's innocent.
I know that my words will never, ever help to ease the grief that you feel. And I also want to reach out to you, and I'm sorry that you are having to go through the external noise that's out there of people taking another view on everything that's happened. And I appreciate how painful that must be for you and how insensitive it is of the people who are trying to suggest that other things happened.